looking for you. Scooby Doo, where are you? All the stars are here, waiting for you. Couldn't have a show without you. Scooby, Scooby-Doo, Scooby, Scooby-Doo.
Hello, Scooby Doo fans! Welcome to my Season 1 Episode 9 review of the new Scooby Doo movies. So last time I continued my 2024 summer special with the release of my review of Season 1 Episode 4 of Scooby Doo Who Are You. So I hope you guys enjoyed my re-review, my updated thoughts on Season 1 Episode 4 of Scooby Doo Who Are You. But of course today, I'll be covering Season 1 Episode 9 of the new Scooby Doo movies, titled The Spooky Fog of Juneberry, which was released on November 4th, 1972. The short synopsis of the episode is, when the gang get pulled over by a local police officer named Don Knotts, they decide to spend the night in the town. But it doesn't take long before the gang find another strange mystery. So today's guest star is Don Knotts. Now, if you guys remember, Don Knotts has already made an appearance in the new Scooby Doo movies, as he was the guest star in Season 1 Episode 5 of the new Scooby Doo movies, which was Guess Who's Not Coming to Dinner, which I also cite as my favorite episode of the new Scooby Doo movies. So he's our first repeating guest star. He's not going to be the last. There will be more repeating guest stars. But I've already gone in depth and given you guys a summary of who exactly Don Knotts is. So I won't go as in depth as I was in Season 1 Episode 5. So if you want for any newcomers who are watching this video first, you can go back and watch my Season 1 Episode 5 review, where I go a little more in depth on Don Knotts' history. But I'm just going to kind of do a short, condensed version of what I did in the previous video, just in case if any newcomers didn't see my Season 1 Episode 5 review and don't know who Don Knotts is. So like I said the first time we met Don Knotts in the Season 1 Episode 5, I said that unless if you were part of the older audience who was around in the 60s and 70s, you probably aren't familiar with Don Knotts as an actor. So let me give a short, brief rundown of Don Knotts, just to get any newcomers up to speed on who exactly Don Knotts is. If you want a little more in-depth summary, I do a little more in-depth summary of him in my Season 1 Episode 5 review, so you can go check that out if you want, me to talk about more of his iconic roles. But here, I'm just going to mention the most important ones. So Don Knotts was an American comedic actor who was born on July 21st, 1924 in Morgantown, West Virginia. In 1953, he would begin his acting career on a TV show called Search for Tomorrow, which ran from 1953 to 1955, and he played a series regular on that show. His other memorable roles he played include his most famous role, Barney Fife, who he plays on shows such as The Andy Griffith Show, Mayberry RFD, The New Andy Griffith Show, and a TV movie called Return to Mayberry. Ironically, if you are an Andy Griffith fan, this is a big love letter to it, because this is a parody of that show. Don Knotts plays a sheriff similar to Barney Fife, and he also has a partner that has Griffith as the last name. So if you're a big Andy Griffith fan, and a Scooby-Doo fan, you might actually really like this episode, because it's kind of like a pairing of the two, and Don Knotts plays like a parody version of his Barney Fife character. He had the Don Knotts Show, which he hosted for 22 episodes. He was in a TV show called Three's Company, where he played a series regular named Ralph Furley. And he was also in the movie called Chicken Little. At the time of this episode, Don Knotts wasn't really doing anything major. He was just guest starring in a couple of other shows as himself, but he wasn't really doing anything big at that time. Sadly, at the time of recording this, Don Knotts has since passed away. He passed away on February 24th, 2006, with his final role being the direct-to-video movie Air Buddies. As per usual, I'll be watching Season 1, Episode 9 of the new Scooby Doo Movies on the new Scooby Doo Movies, the Almost Complete Collection. This has some good amount of special features, which I'll cover when we get to the final episode of the series. And it has every episode of the new Scooby Doo Movies, minus the Addams Family episode, which, like I always say, I go more in depth in my Season 1, Episode 3 review, so if you want to know more about that, you can go check that out and know why. Now, like I said the first time we talked about Don Knotts, I personally am not a huge fan of Don Knotts. I've never watched any of his stuff. I'm not familiar with him as an actor, as a comedic actor. My only exposure to him besides these 2 episodes is the Scooby Doo Night of 100 Frights video game, which I played on my channel, which I actually do enjoy him in that. And he voices Mayor Turkey Lurkey in the movie Chicken Little, which I did watch Chicken Little when I was younger, so I know that movie. But besides that, I'm not familiar with Don Knotts' show, like The Andy Griffith Show or Three's Company. I'm not familiar with that. I don't know his roles on that. But, like I said, if you're a fan of The Andy Griffith Show, you probably love this episode, because this is very much a love letter to that show. It's like a combining of Scooby-Doo and that show. So, even though I've never seen it, I do know a lot of elements and a lot of references to that show are in this episode. So I believe most fans actually do like this episode. I've heard good reception on it, and it's probably not surprising to see why, considering a lot of older people do like Don Knotts, and a lot of people have seen, the Andy Griffith Show. So it's definitely an episode that, would resonate a lot with fans of that show. I do also want to ask you guys, what's your overall opinion of Don Knotts? Are you a big fan of him? Not so much? And what do you think of him as a guest star, especially the second time around? Do you think it's just as good as the first time? Not so much? Maybe better? But yeah, this is viewed as a very good episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies. It's viewed very well, very highly by Scooby-Doo fans. So why don't we take a look at the episode to see whether I think it is a good or bad episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies. The episode begins with the Mystery Machine traveling down a desert road, and the gang are pretty starved as they didn't get any food on the last town that they visited, because they didn't expect that it was going to take this long to get to the next town. Fred tells them that they do have watermelons in the back, but Shaggy and Scooby, of course, being their hungry selves, have eaten the last of their food. And so when they see the sign for Juneberry, they decide to go in and hopefully find some food for themselves. They drive through, but the town is covered in this very eerie, spooky fog. And then we end up hearing a mysterious groan and some strange noises, culminating in laughter and chanting and moaning. Eventually, the gang decides to get out of town as they all lost their appetite, and they just want to get out of that spooky town as fast as possible. A little up the road, a police officer on a motorcycle chases after them and pulls them over. The officer takes his gloves off, and then it's his shades, revealing that it's Don Knotts. He interrogates them about how fast they were driving, and Scooby whispered something to Shaggy, and Shaggy then in turn whispers something to the rest of the gang, specifically Daphne, and the gang realize that it's Don Knotts. He gets them to come back into Juneberry as Don Knotts says that it's 1,000 miles since the next town, and the gang are both hungry and they need a place to sleep, so they just figure whatever, it is what it is. And Don Knotts says that he didn't see the spooky fog, so he gives them a police escort back into the town of Juneberry. Upon arriving back in Juneberry, the fog has lifted, and a car drives off exclaiming that they're leaving. It's this car full of a bunch of people, some random people, probably townsfolk who are getting out of there because they don't like the spooky fog. Don Knotts then introduces them to his partner, Sheriff Dandy Griffith. We also meet a man named Gene Holtree who complains about the cattle rustling that's been going on, and he drives off saying that the sheriff better do something, or else he's going to lose, business, and everybody's going to be driven out of town. So Knotts leads them inside to the police station, where they settle in for the night. The gang are obviously puzzled by this, as they were expecting some hotel and a restaurant, but Don Knotts ends up telling them that they're going to sleep in the beds in the prison cell, and they're also going to have some food that Don Knotts got as like a reward from some person that he stopped. I think it's called a banana custard delight, and Fred even seems like he likes the idea. Velma doesn't, but I find it interesting that Fred actually likes the idea, and he's like, I'm gonna try it. And him, Shaggy, and Scooby look like they're gonna try it. I don't know if Daphne gets one. Maybe she does. As they're sleeping, Don Knotts is having trouble sleeping as a shadow passes over him and he gets scared. The shadow then goes to where Scooby is sleeping and scares him as well, and it throws a horseshoe with a message on it at Scooby, and then it laughs and leaves. We never find out what the shadow is, so it could be the Skeleton Man, it could be something else. Who knows? The gang then reads the note, and another laugh comes from outside, as the note pretty much tells them to get out of Juneberry while they still can. So basically just a threatening note. When they wake Don Knotts, he pretends to know about the whole situation, and he goes to the window, and he tells the ghost not to fool around with the law, but another laugh comes, and Don Knotts runs back. Everyone then tries to figure out who did it, and so the next day, they decide to try and make the sheriff laugh, Sheriff Danny Griffith, because and see if his laugh matches the one they heard, as he was the only one not in the station during the night when Don Knotts and the rest of the gang were there, and they obviously know that Don Knotts and them didn't do it. So the gang is obviously putting suspicious on him. They're suspicious of, Sheriff Danny Griffith. So they do every possible thing to try to make him laugh. Shaggy and Don Knotts tell a joke. Fred and Velma do an impersonation of Laurel and Hardy, which is actually pretty interesting considering who the guest stars will be in the next episode. Daphne and Shaggy try to play a laughing game with him, and Scooby does a little dance for him and slips on a banana, and that eventually makes him laugh, but it doesn't match the laugh that they heard last night. Still doesn't mean that he's not a suspect, though. The lights then dim as the spooky fog has returned, and they hear more moaning, and Don Knotts, Scooby, and Shaggy all hide under the table. Velma and Fred go outside to search for clues, but to no avail, and they wonder if the sheriff's going to come out with them, but he says there's no point since he can't see anything, and so they just end up going by themselves. However, Velma does show the others one thing that she found, which was truck tracks. So they decide to follow the truck tracks up a hill out of Juneberry. Don Knotts then reveals that it leads to the cemetery, so the gang decide to investigate the cemetery later that night. Why? I don't know. Maybe they thought it would raise too much suspicion to do it now. Shaggy was even like wondering now, and Fred's like no, and then he says tonight, and then that makes Shaggy even more frightened. I don't know what Shaggy was expecting. They were going to investigate it anyways, but I totally get Shaggy. Investigating a cemetery at night is just a recipe for disaster. That sounds like a horrible idea, but they gotta do it to figure out and solve this mystery. When the gang returned to the cemetery later that night to investigate it, they all split up and look for clues, unaware that a man in a skeleton suit is following them. Before that, though, they decide to split up with Fred and Velma going one way, Daphne and Scooby going another way, and then Don Knotts and Shaggy going another way as well. And we do get a lot of shenanigans with Daphne and Scooby and Don Knotts and Shaggy, which are all fun. The scene is pretty good. I actually like the Skeleton Man creeping up on Shaggy, Scooby, and Don Knotts, which ends up with Scooby finding, the secret door, secret passageway.
It's a skeleton! Do something, Don! I am! This is as fast as I can run backwards! Oh, he's gaining on us!
The mountain is opening. But how?
It's Scooby. That tombstone is the control key, and he's found it.
Scooby Doo. He's done it again.
I'm going after him. missed. But I'm gonna follow him.
We'll go with you.
As mentioned previously, and as you saw in that scene, Scooby accidentally triggers a secret door, and then we get a fun chase scene of Don, Shaggy, and Scooby trying to evade all these different ghosts who have awesome designs and are pretty creepy.
You did it, Scooby! You shook the skeleton off our trail!
Let's get out of here while we can.
Uh-oh, wrong way!
Anybody know which way? It's Lady Ghost.
She's no lady. Where do we run now?
We've used 3 directions. There's only one left.
Velma, Fred, and Daphne follow the skeleton man into a tunnel, and the others go there too, and they venture forward since they have no way out. But Shaggy and Scooby and Don Knotts all get scared by another ghost, which is the same ghost from before, and they get separated from the gang. Fred, Daphne, and Velma then see stalactites and stalagmites, which turn out to be dinosaur teeth. However, they go away, and Fred realizes that it's all an illusion. How him and Velma came to this conclusion, I don't know. It's never explained. We never get to see how. They just say that it disappeared, but we don't see Fred or Velma discovering any sort of projection or any sort of microphone or loudspeaker or anything. We then cut to Scooby, Shaggy, and Don Knotts, who are still trying to evade more ghosts. Some are like the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. And then this ghost that's riding these horses in a carriage. And then a giant rock comes towards them and creates a large pit, with Scooby and Shaggy getting stuck in the large pit as Scooby goes towards the edge of it and then falls down because it breaks. And Shaggy tries to lift him up, but then they fall down into the pit. And I guess the Skeleton Man likes toying with them because he puts down a ladder and trolls Scooby with it, thinking that giving him hope. And Scooby can't reach the ladder, but then he pulls it away anyways to mess with them and playing games with them. They then get the idea of building a pile of rocks to the top to escape. And we actually get to see Shaggy being very optimistic and trying to find a way out and saying to Scooby, it's a chance, let's try it. Once they pile all the rocks into a way where they can climb up and try to escape, Shaggy says that one of them has to climb it to get to where they need to go. Scooby's very reluctant, but Shaggy says that he's got, the feet for it. So Scooby reluctantly goes and he climbs up, but someone grabs one of the rocks and it causes Scooby to fall. Shaggy, though, being a great leader and great pep talker, says, "Don't give up, Scoob. If there's a way out, we'll find it." Which is great on Shaggy's part. I like that he's trying to be optimistic. After finding a set of railroad tracks, Scooby and Shaggy hop onto a coal cart and ride the rails, hitting bumps and such until they are thrown out. During this, Shaggy and Scooby yell for help, and the animators, I guess, forgot to animate Shaggy's mouth moving because we don't actually see Shaggy's mouth move to see that he's yelling for help. He just yells for help without his mouth opening. They end up right back where they started. However, they now have a chain, so they decide to use it to climb up. And it ends up working as Scooby-Doo is able to lasso the chain onto one of the rocks. And it gives Shaggy and Scooby a way to escape. And they reunite and meet back up with Don Knotts, Fred, Daphne, and Velma. Fred then finds a hidden door, which they then push open, and they see a large computer at the top of a stairwell where the Skeleton Man is at and controlling all these mechanisms that's making all the noises that they've been hearing. And I'm assuming the ghost projections and the dinosaur projections. Don then sneezes pretty loudly, and this causes the Skeleton Man to hear them, and this creates a large amount of smoke, as well as an earthquake. I don't know if the earthquake happened randomly, and that was bad luck, or if the Skeleton Man somehow created an earthquake. Regardless, everyone gets to the other side, and the Skeleton Man floods the caverns to get the gang off his trail, and everyone swims and gets out on high ground. I like the chase scene because we get to see Shaggy and Don show more chemistry as they're trying to jump across the earthquake, you know, the crack that's in front of them. And we also get to see Scooby save Don Knotts, since Don Knotts says he doesn't know how to swim. And Shaggy even makes a nice joke of saying, well, this is a good time to learn. And Scooby ends up helping him.
Fred, the skeleton is getting away.
The world's coming to an end.
Earthquake! Jump! Hurry!
You made it.
Are you ready?
Hurry, boys. It's getting wider every second.
Okay, Don. Let's go. Hang on, Don. You're lucky you hung on to me. Come on, Scooby. Jump.
Jump,
Go,
Scooby.
Jump! Come on, Scoop! Here we go!
You're welcome, Scooby.
Water! We're gonna have to swim for it!
But I don't know how to swim.
Well, this is a good time to learn.
It isn't easy swimming upstream. Now I know how salmon feel.
They all catch up with the Skeleton Man, and he is climbing out on a rope, which he then cuts after he gets to the top. Fred then comes up with the idea of Scooby climbing up on the walls, and once he gets to the top, he lowers the rope, which everybody ends up using to swing up to the top. I like the scene because it shows Fred, you know, thinking of an idea of what to do, thinking on the spot, and we get to see Scooby's bravery in full swing. And I also feel Shaggy's, nervousness as he shakes when he gets to the top. I'd be scared too if I had to climb to the top of that dead volcano. Just because I'm afraid of heights.
And when you get to the top, be sure you don't let go of the rope, Scooby.
Okay.
Good luck, Scooby!
Go, Scooby.
30 Scooby snacks if you make it.
Hang on, Scoob.
That was close! He made it!
Scooby-Doo, you did it again.
Okay, after I get up there, I'll give you a signal to come up. Are you ready up there, Scooby?
Yeah.
Oh boy, Fred is almost to the top. Daphne, you go up next.
Come on, Scooby! Just a little bit more! Okay, next!
I'm coming, Fred. Phew, that was work. Golly, I'm worried.
Don't look down, Velma! Atta girl, give me your hand.
I thought I'd never make it. Oh,
Quit shaking, Shaggy. You're safe now.
I'm okay. You better get down.
Tie her good and tight, Don.
Ready? He sure is heavy for a little guy.
Stop, Ken. He's at the top.
Now back outside, the gang see a large amount of cattle, which the Skeleton Man is forcing the cattle into large trucks. The gang then are able to create a stampede thanks to Scooby's barking, which they use as a tactic as Scooby's barks frighten the cattle a little bit and cause them to move. So they get the idea and bark, so it causes the stampede. And they capture the Skeleton Man and reveal him to be Gene Haltree. He was using the fog to sneak the cattle out in trucks unnoticed. And then Don Knotts takes him away to put him back in prison for his crimes. The episode ends with the sheriff congratulating them all, and the gang leave but are soon pulled over by Don Knotts once again. The reason being is that he's delivering Scooby back to them, as Scooby still very much admires Don Knotts, and everyone laughs about it, and we get a nice happy ending of Don waving them goodbye, and they go off on their next adventure. I'm going to give Season 1, Episode 9 of the new Scooby Doo Movies 4 stars out of 5. So yeah, this was a pretty good episode. I actually really liked the second Don Knotts episode. It doesn't beat the first one. I still think the first Don Knotts episode is the better of the two, if you were to ask me. But let's go into the negatives of the episode first, and what holds it back from being a perfect 5 out of 5, or just a 5 out of 5 in general. Starting with the negatives, I'll start off with two members of the gang that I thought weren't that strong. And that was Daphne and Velma. I didn't like how they utilized Daphne and Velma in this episode. They didn't really do anything. Like, Daphne was a little bit cowardly, but she wasn't given enough moments to feel like she was as cowardly as Shaggy and Scooby. She didn't help find any clues or anything, or wasn't a leader, or didn't have any really moments to shine. And Velma didn't really serve her role. Like, she had no clues to piece together the mystery, and she didn't really do anything else that stood out, so yeah, they were just very weak in this episode. I think they could have given Daphne and Velma more to do. Speaking of the clues, next we have the clues of the episode. The clues were lacking. Like, there were no clues throughout the episode to help point towards a suspect or a motive. There was really nothing. Yeah, you had the threatening letter that the Skeleton Man threw. You also had the, truck tracks, but there wasn't really anything else. And I wouldn't even consider those clues because they didn't help point towards a suspect, and they didn't help point towards a motive. It just kind of was like the gang were on an adventure. They stumble, like they took what they can get. Like, tracks to me aren't really much of clues in my mind. And the threatening note was just a scare tactic. Like, it wasn't really anything major. I don't consider those clues, so I think they could have done a better job in the clue department. And my final negative is that I thought the villain of the episode, outside of costume, Gene Haltree, wasn't really that impressive. He was kind of weak. All he did was yell at the sheriff, bark at him, saying, "What are you going to do about these cattle rustlers?" And then, and then just leaves. Like, he just barks at him and then leaves. He doesn't really set up any sort of legend for the Skeleton Man. He doesn't do anything particularly standoutish. He just he's just introduced, so we know he exists in the episode, which is at least good. At least he wasn't a nobody. At least they introduced him in the episode, but he wasn't given much to do. So, yeah, he was unimpressive outside of costume. That's all I got for negative. So I think it's about time we get on to the positives of the episode and what makes this episode good. Well, for starters, we have Fred. And Fred, I thought, was a good leader in this episode. He helped lead the way. He helped take charge like he always does. He served his bare minimum role. He did a good job leading the gang throughout the whole entire adventure / mystery. Then we have Shaggy and Scooby, who are also great as well. Shaggy was a really good leader when him, Scooby, and Don Knotts were separated from the gang. I thought Shaggy did a good job as a leader. Like, whenever he was with Don Knotts and Scooby by themselves, he kind of took charge. Or when him and Scooby were separated from Don Knotts, he took charge as well. So, he was a good leader when Fred wasn't around. And he definitely took on the optimism that Fred usually has of, like, there's always a way, the way out, let's look for it. Shaggy did that with Scooby. Like, he tried to find a way out. He was being optimistic. Scooby, he was telling Scooby, don't give up, we'll find a way out. He was uplifting, he was a good leader. he did everything he could to make sure that they continued searching and find a way out. As for Scooby, I actually like Scooby in this episode. Scooby was brave in this episode. Reluctantly brave, but still brave. He helped him and Shaggy escape from that large pit. You know, when he climbed up the rocks. And, you know, also threw the chain on the rock. And he also helped the whole entire gang and Don Knotts escape the dead volcano and the caves entirely when he climbed up the dead volcano to the top and was able to get the rest of the gang out. Then we have the guest star, Don Knotts. Don Knotts was a good guest star in this episode. This time he was a lot different than he was the first time. He definitely didn't really help solve the mystery, but he had great chemistry with Shaggy and Scooby specifically, and a little bit of the rest of the gang too. But specifically, he had amazing chemistry with Shaggy and Scooby, especially Shaggy. Him and Shaggy worked as a great dynamic, and he was just as cowardly as them. But he was also like a good sheriff, like he had good intentions at heart. But I like that he was just as cowardly as Shaggy and Scooby, but he was also funny and, you know, and helped, you know, when he needed to. He had great chemistry with them. He played off them well. They were a great group. I think they had a great group dynamic, and I loved seeing Don Knotts interact with Shaggy and Scooby throughout the entire episode. He was a lot different than his Homer Pipsqueak persona. He was a lot more cowardly in this one, more scared, and he more so fit well with Shaggy and Scooby and less with Fred, Daphne, and Velma. He still had some good moments with them, the whole gang, but specifically, he had a great group dynamic with Shaggy and Scooby, and had a great chemistry with Shaggy and Scooby, especially Shaggy. Him and Shaggy hit it off really well. Then we have the villain of the episode, which is the Skeleton Man. I thought the Skeleton Man had a great design, and I actually found the Skeleton Man to be pretty creepy in this episode. He used a lot of great scare tactics, like the ghost projections. You know, he used his own costume to kind of frighten the gang a little bit. For like one scene, really. He also used the dinosaur projection to scare Fred, Daphne, and Velma. And he seemed to glean joy out of scaring them, you know, or at least it seemed like it. Maybe it was an act, maybe he was actually enjoying it. I don't know. But he was definitely laughing about it and messing with them a lot. Maybe that was to scare them even more, to make, you know, by making him seem like he enjoys it, maybe that was a way of scaring the gang more. Regardless whether he enjoyed it or not, he was still a creepy villain. He had a great design. I liked the Skeleton Man. I thought he was pretty creepy. And even though he ran away a lot of the time, it wasn't necessarily threatening or menacing, and didn't really pose much of a threat to the gang. He used a lot of good scare tactics, and when he needed to, like when he flooded the water into the cave, he definitely posed a threat then, because some of the Don Knotts could have easily drowned had Scooby not saved him. And so could have the rest of the gang had they not known how to swim well. His motive was also good too. He basically wanted to steal and sneak cattle out of Juneberry unnoticed, which is actually a pretty unique motive since stealing cattle is not something we've actually seen in Scooby-Doo yet. It is going to be a common motive throughout the franchise. But this is the first instance of it, I believe, so it's very unique. I don't think it's a money or land motive. It doesn't look like it to me. It's more so he's just stealing cattle, sneaking them out of Juneberry, and using the fog as a cover so that way nobody knows that he's stealing and sneaking cattle out of the town. Now, what the purpose of him stealing and sneaking the cattle out of town was, I couldn't say. He never explained what it was. And then the gang and Don Knotts never explained it, so I don't know what his purpose was to steal the cattle, so it could have been a money motive. But even if it was, you know, it still was a good, unique motive. I don't think it was a money motive. I think he was just sneaking and stealing cattle for some other reason. Whatever that reason is, it's still cool. Like, I like the motive. I like how fresh and unique it is. It's something we hadn't seen yet in Scooby-Doo. We also had a good number of suspects throughout the episode. We only had 2 suspects, which was Sheriff Danny Griffith, and we also had Gene Holtree, who ended up being the actual villain. It was a 50-50, and it was good equal chance. Even though the gang debunked that he couldn't, Sheriff Griffith couldn't have made the laugh, that didn't mean that he couldn't have, used a recording to make that laugh or something else, or he could have had some help. So, it still was like a 50-50 shot, and, it still could have been either one of them. So, even though it was the bare minimum, at least they fulfilled that. They at least gave us 2 suspects for 1 villain. That's at least the bare minimum you could do, so I'm happy with that. Next, I found the mystery of the episode to be pretty good. I like the whole mystery of wanting to know what caused the spooky fog in Juneberry. What was the cause of it? I thought that was a unique, cool idea. Like, we hadn't seen, like, a whole spooky fog, so the questions were less about a ghost or anything. It was really like, what's causing the spooky fog with strange noises and laughter and moaning and all that? Like, it was really cool, and I liked the mystery of the episode and trying to figure that out. You don't necessarily know if it's a human cause or a ghostly cause. It could even be a natural phenomenon. Like, it just is really cool, the idea of the mystery. I like how broad it is. You can believe it's like a natural phenomenon, or like a ghostly phenomenon, or human type phenomenon. So I like the mystery. I like how open-ended it is, and on what it could be. And I thought overall it was a compelling mystery that I wanted to know the answer to. The atmosphere of this episode was fantastic. I love the atmosphere of this episode. So it was great because there was like this eerie, creepy fog. The fog of Juneberry was very creepy and eerie and spooky because you had this dark, spooky fog surrounding this normal western town, and it's accompanied by like ghost and strange noises like moaning and laughing and chanting. I absolutely love the atmosphere of Juneberry, and not just Juneberry. I love the atmosphere of the graveyard and of the caves. The cemetery was probably the best of them all, because a cemetery at night is very creepy, very spooky. It was awesome because it was a dark night, and being at a cemetery at night is never a good idea. And it was very dark and creepy because you had all these graves around with dead bodies buried underneath. It was just overall like really cool. I also thought the caves were pretty cool. I think the caves had like a great atmosphere. Like, they were a dark, secluded area, that was near a cemetery, so it was bound to have like some ghost in it. So all these locations provided a great atmosphere because you didn't know what you were going to encounter, what ghosts you were going to encounter, what noises you were going to hear. You were on edge the entire time because of how creepy and eerie this episode was and how spooky it was. Finally, I found the setting of the episode to be pretty good. There was a variety in the setting because we got to go to 3 different locations. So first you have the titular town of Juneberry, which is actually a pretty cool town because it has, on the one hand, it's this normal western town, but on the other hand, when the spooky fog happens, it's like this creepy town with a dark, spooky fog that has strange noises, accompanying it. And then you contrast that with, like, the normal western town, and Juneberry is a very fascinating town because it's like, on the one hand, it's just like a normal place, but when this fog rolls in, it becomes a completely different place. It's spooky and eerie and creepy, and it's a place you don't want to go. Likewise, like I said with the cemetery was a great setting too. Like I said before, you had the dead bodies buried underneath. It's a dark night. Going to a cemetery at night is never a good idea, but it's a dark night in a spooky place like the cemetery where there's dead bodies buried underneath the ground under these graves. Not the kind of place you want to be at night. And then you have the caves, which are also a nice creepy setting too. It was a dark, secluded area. There was no light source. The gang had lost their flashlights. So it was like this dark, secluded area, kind of similar to like the last episode I reviewed with the Miner 49er and the mines. This was the same place. It was like a dark, underground, secluded area that, you know, didn't have much light source, and you were hearing strange noises, and there was ghosts everywhere, and it was nearby a cemetery, so it was bound to have some ghost in it. So I really like all the settings of the episode. It had a lot of variety. They were all spooky and creepy and eerie, and they provided different set pieces of the episode, spooky set pieces of the episode. So great job on the setting, especially with Juneberry. Juneberry is a great one. The cemetery is probably the best one, though. Cemetery is amazing, but I love the contrast of Juneberry. How it can be this normal town 1 minute, and then the spooky ghost town the next minute. Overall, guys, I would recommend this episode to fans and newcomers of the show. While I don't think it's the best Don Knotts episode, as I think the first Don Knotts episode is still better than this one. If I had to pick which one out of the two, I would definitely say the first one was better. But I would say both of them are very good. Don Knotts delivered another awesome episode, and that's all that mattered. Don Knotts delivered another great episode. And it all just depends on what mood you're in. You know, if you're looking for a dark, mystery-themed episode with Don Knotts, then I suggest the first episode with Don Knotts, because that will give you a more dark mystery one. But if you want, like, a spooky adventure with Don Knotts, and you're, like, a fan of Scooby Doo and the Andy Griffith Show, you'll probably like this episode more. If you had to ask me which one I prefer, like I said, I prefer Guess Who's Not Coming to Dinner over this one. But this one's just as good and is a good companion piece to them, to the first one, and I highly recommend watching both of them. They're very good episodes. Don Knotts was a fantastic guest star. He really nailed it both times he guest starred on the new Scooby Doo movies, so check both of them out. Check this episode out. It just needed to be a bit better with, you know, some of the clues. You know, we needed clues in the episode. And some better character moments for Daphne, Velma, and Gene Holtree. But other than that, really good episode. Highly recommend it. It's an awesome episode. Definitely one of the better episode of the new Scooby Doo movies, and maybe even one of the best ones. Doesn't top the Sandy Duncan one or the first Don Knotts episode, but definitely like the third best episode of the new Scooby Doo movies so far, I would probably say. Really good episode. Fantastic follow-up to the first Don Knotts episode. And this will be Don Knotts' last time as a guest star, so you won't have to worry about him appearing again. So he ended out on a good note. He provided us 2 good episodes, and I'm pleased with both of them. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Please give it a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the episode. Do you like this episode? Are you like me? Do you think it's one of the best or better episodes of the new Scooby Doo movies? Do you hate this episode? I'd be interested in that. Like, do you think it's, you know, not as good as people make it out to be? Like, are you not big on Don Knotts as a guest star? Do you think this is a poor follow-up to the first episode? Or are you somewhere in the middle where you think it's like okay, but it's not good or bad? I'm curious for your thoughts, so let me know. And subscribe for more Scooby Doo content like this, or if you're just interested in any of my other content, I'll have more Scooby Doo reviews coming up, as I've said plenty of times. The 2024 Summer Special and Scooby Month will all be focused on Scooby Doo, specifically the new Scooby Doo movies, and re-reviews of Scooby Doo Wario, so plenty of Scooby Doo content on the way. So if you're into Scooby Doo and you like hearing me talk about Scooby Doo, then stick around, because I'll have plenty more Scooby Doo reviews coming up. You can also follow me on Facebook, where I have discussions about things we talk about on both my channels, and Twitch, where I hope to live stream in the future. In my next video, I will continue my 2024 Summer Special with my re-review and my updated thoughts on Season 1, Episode 5 of Scooby Doo Wario, Decoy for a Dog Napper. So if you're interested in all my updated thoughts on Decoy for a Dog Napper, then join me in the next video. But after that, we will continue my reviews of the new Scooby Doo movies with Season 1, Episode 10 of the new Scooby Doo movies, titled The Ghost of Bigfoot, guest starring Laurel and Hardy. Yeah, I told you guys to pay attention to that joke, because, yeah, Laurel and Hardy are our next guest stars, and from what I remember, The Ghost of Bigfoot is a fondly remembered episode. I've heard good things about it, and I believe I actually liked it when I watched it, first watched it, so I'm excited to revisit it and see if I still like it. But I'm really excited to tackle the Laurel and Hardy episode, so join me for that. after the Scooby Doo War U Season 1 Episode 5 re-review. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, peace out.
Hey, Scooby! Scooby, Scooby Doo, looking for you. Scooby, Scooby Doo, where are you? All the stars are here, waiting for you. Couldn't have a show without you. Scooby.